Welcome to Money Market, a Bank of Tampa podcast. We highlight the businesses, expert business advice, local economy, and points of interest in the Tampa Bay market. Follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find your finer podcasts. And please share this episode with a friend or colleague. I am your host, Owen Lefebvre, the Pinellas County Market President for the Bank of Tampa, Tampa Bay's oldest and largest community bank. Today, we are joined by the one and only Tom Oliver. Tom is the Chief Administration Officer for the Bank of Tampa, and he's here to talk about the critical and prevalent topic that's running rampant, and that is fraud and fraud prevention tactics. Tom, can you start a little bit like what your background is and share a little bit about yourself, what you do at the bank?
Sure, Owen. Thanks for having me, first of all. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for coming, man.
I started off in community bank risk management as a consultant, and that then led into an opportunity to be a chief risk officer for a community bank, and then led up into opportunities to be in executive leadership at a community bank. So here at the Bank of Tampa, I'm responsible for most of the administrative functions that serve our bankers and the teams that support our banking team. So risk management and fraud are part of my team here at the Bank of Tampa, as well as all operations.
Okay. I was going to say not only that, I mean, you do a lot here at the bank and responsible
Thanks,
for
man.
that. So operations, treasury, right?
Treasury, yeah,
Okay.
payments.
So wear a lot of hats. Could you provide an overview of the different types of bank frauds that individuals and businesses encounter? I mean, it's incredible the amount of fraud that we've historically is an issue, right? But after COVID, it seems like it's just gone through the roof. So, I mean, what do you see? What are we looking at?
So I'm kind of biased on this one because I spend a big chunk of my life fighting check fraud.
Okay.
And so there's just so much time spent with teams trying to prevent check fraud, and then when there is check fraud, trying to prevent further check fraud. But then, there's a lot of other types of fraud out there. You see fraud where with ACH, you see it where our people and clients are hacked, where there's account takeover, and you see phishing schemes where hackers are trying to get information from our clients, as well as email compromise as some of the most common ones that we see.
So, I mean, obviously that's a lot, and I think we can probably touch on all of them or maybe a handful of them. But if you're giving advice to somebody, what are some of the key preventative measures that businesses can take to protect themselves?
So let's start with like the email-based frauds, right? And phishing in particular is where somebody poses as a legitimate, maybe somebody that's familiar or a legitimate vendor, an email requesting some information from you in the hopes that they can get you to provide information like social security number, date of birth, or even online banking credentials. And so knowing what to look for, I think, is the most important thing with regard to, first of all, does it make sense, right? Did I actually do business with Amazon here recently and there's a purchase? And, and then look at the email address itself and say, well, would Amazon be sending me an email from a Gmail domain? Mm-hmm. That type of stuff.
So apply some common sense.
I also think that probably foundational is to have the good malware antivirus stuff on your computer and having some spam filters that can help you, just spam out domains that don't make sense, and to protect you. At the bank, we have this header that comes on emails that are from outside the organization. Mm-hmm. So we might get an email that says it's from our CEO, Corey Neal, but then you look at it and you can see it's from outside of the organization. So immediately with that, thanks to that header, that somebody's trying to pull one over on you. So those are some things that come to mind.
And I guess things like looking like for misspellings when it comes to emails, and if you hover over the email address, I know sometimes it's different. I mean, it looks like it's coming from Tom Oliver, but it's the address is completely different.
Yeah, but when it's a spoof type situation, and a lot of times the emails will have terrible grammar, right? Yeah. And they're thrown together pretty quickly.
Wire this money here now, please, thank you.
Yeah.
What about other things like card skimming? Is that something that still takes place? Is it an issue?
So we don't see that much card skimming, with our day-to-day activities. I know it's still out there, but based on the nature of our client base, I think we don't see as much of it as some of the larger banks do. But it's still, when you're, using the gas pump, it's always good to, before you stick your card in there, does anything look suspicious, right? Is there something that's put on over top of the base card reader that could be trying to get your information? So always be on the lookout for fraud.
I probably should know better. I mean, I will grab when I'm at the gas station, I grab it and kind of wiggle it. I don't know if that does any good or not, but I'm thinking, okay, if someone just placed something on here, maybe it'll come off.
Well, it could create some liability for the station owner if you do bust their legitimate
break it
device. But yeah, no, I've done the same thing
just drive away.
myself before. Is that this doesn't make sense? And I mean, I've come
you ever
across
found one?
legitimate.
You have? Wow. Okay.
Skimming tools.
You also mentioned near and dear to your heart, and that's check fraud. So interesting. The New York Times just had an article, but so according to FinCEN, banks and credit unions are expected to file nearly 540,000 suspicious activity reports tied to only check fraud. And so when I think of, check fraud, I mean, the volume of checks that we have is down dramatically, and it's not not only for us at the bank, but industry wide. But yet check fraud is like through the roof. So why?
So I saw the FinCEN information myself, and I just want to note that is a 10% increase from 2022, which was a record year in check fraud. Wow. So we continue on a trajectory of record years of check fraud. We are seeing our clients use checks less, but there's still a need for checks, where that's just the easiest way to get payment to, in particular, a vendor for service. And so what happens right now is the most common types of fraud that we see are when checks are stolen from the mail.
Okay.
Right. And so
then like your mailbox typically is that?
Well, there are degrees of this as well. So there's, hey, I need to mail a check payment out, and I'm going to stick it in my mailbox. I'm going to put the flag up and let everybody in the world know there's a check in my mailbox, right? That they should come take a look at. There's also the blue bins that we all know that are iconic to the post office, and those are susceptible to burglary. And so criminals will go break into those, steal the checks, and then use those checks to either alter them and deposit them or create counterfeits off of the account information.
That's amazing. So people are thinking, okay, I'm not going to put it in my mailbox and put the flag up and announce to the world that like I have something in here, come check out my mailbox. Let me go put it in and trust the government, trust the safe blue box. Not so safe.
That's still not so safe. And then beyond that, there's crime within the postal system where it's compromised a little bit, and there are organized crime rings that pay for checks to be stolen, that are going to lock boxes.
Okay, so how do you avoid check fraud?
So don't use checks. Okay. Corey, my boss, likes to say, don't use checks, right? But if you have to use checks, don't stick them in your mailbox, put up the flag, right? Or don't put them in the blue bin. If you got to mail them, try to get a tracking number, right? Okay. So that you can, there's a little bit of an extra security feature on it where you can keep track of that the check actually got to where it's supposed to go. But really the best case scenario is that you sign up for some type of electronic payment method. ACH comes to mind, but also Zelle for business.
Zelle for business, or, I mean, what about just like bill pay, like traditional bill pay? Traditional
bill pay may set you up as an electronic payment and may also send a check.
Okay. I don't know if everybody realized that. So tell our listeners a little more.
So we go through a check payment provider. Ours is Fiserv, check free. And what they'll do is if they have an existing relationship where they can ACH that payment through an agreed upon setup that they have with a vendor, they'll go ahead and send the payment.
And maybe actually take it step. So I don't know. I mean, people listening to this, I'm assuming they're going to be a little bit more sophisticated and maybe small business owners. Maybe not. So what is an ACH? And and I guess follow-up question, is it available to everybody? So if you're just a regular consumer and you want to send money, you don't want to use a check, can you use an ACH?
So ACH is generally an electronic payment form that's used by businesses to send multiple payments electronically. Okay. ACH stands for Automated Clearinghouse, which is a payment method that is run through the National Automated Clearinghouse Association.
Been around forever.
There's also wires, are a good way to put payments out. But we were just on the going back to the check. Using your online bill pay to provide checks.
That's right. Thanks.
Right.
Thanks
they
for
will, back in. If they don't have that established ACH relationship, they'll go ahead and cut a check and mail it to the vendor. Now, we don't see a lot of those get stolen and used for check fraud, and I guess it's because they're usually pretty nondescript when they go in the mail, so it is probably safer than sticking a check in a handwritten envelope and mailing it.
Okay. So outside of just what you outlined with electronic payments, is there any other way to help minimize or prevent check fraud?
Well, first of all, just always be on the lookout for fraud. Try to be skeptical, particularly when you're dealing with emails, dealing with people calling you and asking you for information. Really safeguard your information. It's better to, if you get a call from somebody saying they're your bank, it's always better to just say, you know what, I'm going to call you back at my known bank number, and I'll answer your questions that way.
That's great advice. And maybe we can touch a little more on that. I want to share a story. So I had a friend, an acquaintance, reach out to me, and they were asking advice on what to do in this situation. But this woman kept getting a call from someone who said was her bank, and they were very persistent. And so finally she answered the call and were saying that, her account had been compromised, and was asking for, that information. So she goes into the bank office with the branch manager there, hands the phone over to the branch manager and says, "Hey, I'm on the phone with, what they're telling me is the bank." She talks to the woman. This scammer must have been amazing, because they have a conversation, and the branch manager assures her that, yep, this is our fraud department. Give them whatever information they want. And by the time she left, they had put in a request to transfer the money out. $30,000 gone. So that's okay. So not only happens on phone, but I'm assuming same thing happens in email.
Well, so I'm glad you brought up email. The business email compromise is the one that scares me. We see it where we get our clients are compromised, and the hacker will then try to get money out by requesting a wire. Mm-hmm. But we also see our clients fall victim to this too, where their vendors' emails are hacked, they're compromised. So they get a legitimate email from a legitimate vendor, although it's the hacker sending it, and they'll say something like, "Hey, our payment instructions have been updated. Would you mind to update it on your end for us for our next payment?" And then they'll send an invoice, and then our clients out the money that they sent to the hacker.
Wow. I mean, they're smart. They always seem to be one step ahead. So advice there, pick up the phone. Yeah.
You get an email request that has anything to do with payment instructions or wire instructions, say, "Hey, great, got it. I'm going to call you to verify." Definitely pick up the phone and voice verify any payment instructions that you receive by email.
What's amazing is that we have had all these technology advances, and you can send wires, an ACH from your phone. And it literally takes minutes in order to initiate some of those things. But yet, there's just the power of picking up the old fashioned, dialing somebody, talking to them on the other end and verifying the information. Simple as that.
Yeah, no, I think that there are other ways for multi-factor authentication. Is ultimately what we're getting at. Don't just rely on one channel for payment instructions. Verify via multiple channels that you're dealing with authentic information.
Okay, so multi-factor authentication. That's kind of like the analog version where you're just kind of picking up the phone.
That is analog multi-factor authentication for sure.
When we talk about other technologies and maybe things like positive pay or tokens, or what are other ways that you could verify whether or not it's a legitimate transaction?
So there's the old school token where you have this thing that hangs off your keychain, right? Then you enter a number off of that when you're logging in as a different source of authentication. And something that we also will do to kind of impose multi-factor authentications, we'll use DocuSign, which then sends to an email on file as well as a phone number on file to authenticate a request from a client. Okay.
And then what about services like positive pay or are those valuable? Do they make sense?
So think about your client that has actually experienced check fraud.
Yeah.
Now the hacker or the fraudster has your routing number and your account number, and so you're just wide open for further fraud activity on your account. The best thing that you can do is close your account and open a new one.
Sure.
But that is a real pain particularly for business clients. Right?
If you have tons of vendors that you regularly deal with, just setting up all those again, huge nightmare, right?
Right. So there is a solution called Positive Pay, which basically has our client send us a file of the check number and amount of those checks that they're issuing on any given day. They upload it, and then as those checks clear, they'll be referenced against that file that was sent to go, okay, is this an accurate check number? Is this an accurate amount? And then, okay, so it's legitimate. The problem that we're seeing with the types of fraud that we see today is that when that check is stolen and the payee is altered, that it still flies through as a legitimate check. So then stepping it up to positive pay with payee match has kind of become the next level of fraud prevention.
Because in the previous case, they're just looking their check number and amount.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
So, and now we're adding the payee to make sure that it's going to the right person.
Yeah. And it's still just, as a side note, doesn't get to the laziest type of check fraud that you can have is where I just steal the check out of the mail and I endorse it on the back, pay to the order of Tom Oliver, and I deposit it in my account.
And banks don't catch that?
The payee match doesn't catch that. Yeah.
I mean, is there a same or similar service on the ACH side?
There's ACH blocks and filters where then you can go ahead and you can set up limitations on or permissions of who can ACH to and from your account.
Okay. I feel like the unfortunate thing is a lot of people think it's not going to happen to me, right? Until it does. And if people could be a little bit more proactive and have some of these services in place before the fraud occurs, they would be in a better position. But more often than not, I mean, something happens, then they're coming to, the bank and saying, okay, now I need these services. I mean, is that fair?
Yeah, optimism bias, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not going to happen to me, but that's what happens is you have check fraud, and then the next thing you know is that you're faced with the decision of, well, I don't want to close my account and open a new account number, so I have to have a fraud tool. But it is work on anybody who introduces a fraud prevention tool into their life, and so yeah, it's I think the tendency to avoid getting fraud prevention tools until you have to.
So speaking of that, maybe somebody will hear this and say, like, I don't want that to happen to me. So I know we've talked about a couple of things, but any stories that just kind of stand out in your mind that's kind of like a OMG type scenario where it could have been avoided if some of the preventative measures were in place?
An attorney, right, that was doing some estate work that was paying a bigger firm out of Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
right, for some advice, and mailed a couple of checks that were stolen. And a couple months later, they get a call from that firm in Atlanta, like, "Hey, you're outstanding on our payment, and why didn't you pay us?" And well, so they go back and they look at their check history and they find the check numbers that were sent
Mm-hmm.
to pay, and they see that they're made out to, and they were stolen and altered payee. So had they had positive pay in place with payee match, that would have been detected. But the other thing that they could do is review your statement activity on a daily or every other day basis, and just see what's clearing on there to see if it's really are the checks that are clearing against your account, the checks that you wrote.
So in other words, just you have to be vigilant.
Mm-hmm.
Who's liable? Because of course, it doesn't matter what the compromise is. It seems like, as individuals, nobody really wants to take responsibility, and I get it. And people are sometimes at fault for not being vigilant and make mistakes. And so, but they want the bank to make you whole. So who's really responsible?
Okay. So I'll apologize in advance to your listeners because I'm going to actually tell you.
Bring it on.
It depends. There are 4 types of check fraud, right? There's the counterfeit, there's the altered, there's the forged signature, and there's the forged endorsement.
Okay.
If it's counterfeit or it's a forged signature, the bank that's the check is drawn on, or the clearing bank, right? They're responsible for catching that fraud within a day and a half of it actually coming in and posting against the account.
Okay.
If it's an altered item or it's a forged endorsement, the Bank of First Deposit is responsible for catching that on their end, and they actually warranty to us when they submit checks back through the cash letter that they have verified the endorsement and that the item has not been altered.
So how is that process work? Because let's say the other bank, the bank that was deposited at, said, "Well, it's not our fault." So does a client get their money back? Does in this case, let's say it's our client. Do we fight the other bank on it to try to collect on that? What does that look like?
So on any given day, we might have check fraud identified. And let's assume it's not a timely identification, right? So it's like a couple weeks late. We're finally, we had fraud on our account. We can still push that back through the cash letter, even though it's a late return. And then what we hope for is that the Bank of First Deposit will say, okay, well, that was an altered item. Then we'll go ahead and we'll credit you back through the cash letter. And so we'll usually wait 60 to 90 days to kind of see what the Bank of First Deposit will do, and we'll give them the money back to the client if we were notified in a timely manner, right? Like if we still were notified within a reasonable amount of time to be able to act on it and collect it from the Bank of First Deposit. In the event that we're denied, and sometimes we are, they say, "Oh, no, you did not get this within the timely window." You have to go through like a more legal process of requesting it formally, providing an affidavit of that fraud and saying, hey, this was a forged endorsement. You still owe us this money. And that can take a year or more to get back going that route. And so what we'll do is, again, if we were notified in a timely manner by our client that it was inappropriate activity, we'll go ahead and credit them back once we know that we're going to have to go the long route to get the money back for them.
What about nonprofits? And I mean, are they any different than kind of a traditional operating business and then dealing with fraud?
I would say really no. They're kind of with regard to fraud, they're just as susceptible, no more, no less than any other commercial client that we have.
Just like any other business. But
just this week, we had where it was a really interesting situation. They not only figured out how to spoof the email of a non-for-profit, but they had information about like kind of how they normally wire money and who they were managing for the benefit of money. And they spoofed an email that was really, really good for about $1 million to be wired.
Wow.
And so they also stole the cell phone of somebody at the non-for-profit. So when we went to go,
was it not an inside job? I mean, that sounds inside job.
It does sound like an inside job, and there's more to come. I mean, this just happened within the last week. Okay. Right. But they were able to then verify the DocuSign. But we also have another layer of procedure where we call to verify again, over the phone, the client's identity. And whoever stole the phone couldn't answer, like, we've got a passcode, right, that this client had set up. They didn't know the passcode. Well, the client always knows the passcode when they call it, right? And then the person working the phone call actually was like, you don't sound like yourself. Oh, well, I'm sick, right? So then, okay, well, can you verify?
And why do you have a Russian accent?
Can you verify your birthday? And she, like, God bless the hacker, like, she threw out like a date, completely wrong, but she at least took a shot at it.
And a huge sum of money too. I mean,
almost $900,000.
And to a business, obviously, I mean, depending on the size of the business, I mean, if it's a large corporation, I mean, nobody wants to lose that amount of money, but a lot of nonprofits are small and probably, crushing. Wow.
I could wipe them right out.
Yeah. Vigilant is the word that I was looking for and couldn't spit out earlier. But anything else, Tom? Just general advice you want to give to folks out there?
Just always be on the lookout for fraud in business and in your personal life, right? There's just so many folks out there that are trying to take advantage of us. The email communication is so dangerous. Be very skeptical of any email that you get. Always pick up the phone and verify with a phone call there's any payment instructions that you get, and don't stick your checks in the mail.
Man, simple stuff, but effective. Tom, if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you at?
TOliver@bankoftampa.com is my email address. I'm also at TOliveAustria on Twitter.
Fantastic. So, Tom, thanks for coming on Money Market. Really appreciate you coming in.
Thanks, Owen. Appreciate it.
So if you have any questions or a future show idea or would like to be a sponsor, you can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram at Bank of Tampa, and online at bankoftampa.com. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for following. Until next time, adios.